Welcome to AIM Research, everyone. This event is hosted by the Center for Academic Innovation and aims to act as a center for conversation, inspiration, and research to inform educational innovation of all kinds. I'm Kate Hayward, Associate Director for Research and Development and host of this event. If you have ideas for people we should invite to come join us for one of these, please do send them my way. You can check out all of our events at Academic Innovation's event page, and I will throw that in the chat. Today's presentation will be recorded and posted to our CAI YouTube channel afterward. Feel free to submit questions for our speaker using the Zoom Q&A function, and thanks to those of you who have already submitted a few to get us going. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Vania Dimitrova, Professor of Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence at the School of Computing, University of Leeds. Her research focus is on using AI to augment human intelligence, including building systems that help people make sense of data, take decisions in complex settings, expand their knowledge, and learn from experience. She's here today to talk to us about intelligent mentoring systems. Vania, take it away.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to share my thoughts and experience with you. And I'm looking forward to the discussion in the end. So I'll share my screen now. Okay. Okay. So the talk will have basically, one short introduction about my experience at the beginning, and then kind of two parts. One is a vision about the change which we need to do to AI in education. And also I will use one example, which is the active video watching system. But if the time permits, I will mention a few relevant projects, and I'm hoping to have a discussion in the end. I already have some interesting, stimulating questions, which I've kind of prepared answers to. I work at the University of Leeds, and I'm in the computer science department. So I'm an AI researcher, applied AI researcher. And all my work has been on using AI, applying AI to augment humans, augment human intelligence. So in a way, when not doing artificial intelligence, more doing like augmented intelligence. However, to do that augmentation, I'm using AI methods. So it's basically, we're trying to kind of build intelligent systems which help people to do things better. So a lot of my work has been on help with decision making, which I'm not covering in today's talk, but kind of things like, decision support in urban infrastructures, for example, the one which you're seeing here on the left, working intelligent, building conversation skills, communication skills. I've worked 2 years in the Leeds Institute of Medical Education, where we're looking at doctor training, and currently I'm looking at on a project which is looking at in healthcare, and again, healthcare education. So take decisions, preserve knowledge. A lot of those cases, there's a tacit knowledge. So kind of capture that knowledge and then see how we can build on that knowledge. In many of those cases is learning from experience, your own experience of other people, and the kind of the ultimate goal has been to change behavior, kind of to get lead to kind of better outcomes. In kind of overall, the work goes into on the one hand trying to understand the conceptual structures, and then on the other hand trying to understand human behavior. So all of these we're using kind of different AI methods, and then trying to pull everything together to build those interactive systems. What I have observed, so I'm not going to bore you with all this kind of experience and work which we have done there. In many cases, there has not been related to learning, in some has. What we have observed there is that these all real world domains are very complex, they're ill-defined, they're challenging domains, learning to communicate, learning to understand the others, learning to build rapport, learning to take decisions in uncertainties. They are also quite often linked with some form of informal learning happening. And also that learning is happening through the real world experience. So that's my personal kind of view of all these different domains which I have worked and continue to work in. At the same time, I've been involved in the AI in education community for many years. I've kind of led the conferences, I've chaired the conference as a program chair. Right now, I'm the general chair of the current conference on AI in education. I'm currently the president as well of the society. It's been bothering me for many years that the successful and kind of deployable solutions of AI in education have predominantly been in formal settings, most often school-based settings, and kind of difficult to go beyond those settings. And I was thinking, what is missing? What do we need to do in order to kind of enter into these kind of adult education market? By adult education, I mean students and above, so university students and above, like 16 plus. At the same time, there have been changes, external drivers, which are making a big impact on the field, and I think they also are kind of calling for a change in the field. For me, the drivers come with the availability of whatever you call it, big data, small data, but there is now kind of digital, right? So with lots of digital data is available. And there are three main drivers which kind of call for a change in the paradigm or a change in the way we're building those systems. And I would like to I'll try, this is kind of the first, major part of the talk. I'll try to kind of make an argument here that this can lead to these new types of systems, which I call intelligent mentoring systems. So the first driver is the learners. I think, and I noticed that most of the people attending the seminar have kind of backgrounds. So you all are involved with learning technologies. So I think this is kind of fairly obvious to you. You are experiencing that. But again, think about, deploying AI in education systems. So AI in education systems are the systems which use any kind of some form of artificial intelligence to make the learning experiences better. So whose experience we're thinking about? Diversity of learners. Nowadays, we're taking seriously like demographic diversity, age, gender, culture. I mean, you'll see the two references in the bottom, so I'm kind of using their terminology there. So we talk about functional diversity, so different experiences, different knowledge. This is the conventional diversity which we have been looking at in educational systems. And also we're looking at the subjective diversity, like personality characteristics, traits, values, motivations, beliefs. So it's actually really a very, very broad range of parameters we need to think about our learners. So that to me is, and I went through those, so that to me is bringing the call for, we need really to understand learners, but we need to understand learners at scale. So that's kind of, there's always this tension between individual, understanding the individual, but also, how many and how much, bigger diversity we're thinking about. So we really need to think about a broader scope of learner characteristics beyond knowledge and experience. And we also need to know what's relevant really for the domain and the task, because there's so many parameters, so many characteristics people we need. And we also need to get deeper insights in how these are linked to the learning, to the learning experiences of diverse learners. What I think, it is happening already, so it's not whether I think it or not, but we can see here that now, because we have a lot of interactions, a lot of digital traces about the learners, we can actually use data-driven experimental approaches to understand more and more about the individual learners and kind of individual characteristics which are important in the learning experiences. So that's the first driver. The second driver, which I think is calling again for a change and for us to rethink how we are doing this intelligent learning environments is the call for new skills and reskilling. I mean, this is just one of the references, and I'm sure that you know much more than I do in here, is the kind of, we're talking about a new set of skills, and they are getting more on these softer skills or transferable skills, thinking, problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, originality. And the other thing which is also interesting is that we will need to reskill. So basically people have to learn and unlearn to build on previous skills. And also that indicates that's kind of the connection with the demographic diversity before. So again, we're talking about people, well, the diversity as a whole. So people with experience reskilling, people without experience reskilling, etc. And also, again, a kind of a big thing which was pushed mainly from the pandemic, but also I think it's always been there, a very important skill, is the interpersonal and intercultural competences, which are becoming kind of a big driver for that. So we need to do systems, we need to support the development of these skills. So for me, again, kind of what I see in this case, and again, now subjectively basing on my experience, is that we need to learn from experience. We need to really instill self-regulation, self-determination skills. What that means, I've worked with people from professional learning, and I was actually, I mean, I'm a computer scientist, and I was really, I think it was eye-opening to realize that this community has been working so much into thinking how we learn and how we develop professionally, and we take very little, especially in the AI in education. So kind of key points which are not, this is not a comprehensive list of the key points coming from the professional learning community. But the argument I'm saying is that we really need to look at what that community is saying, what those researchers are saying, and then we need to start to think about how we build that in our systems. So the first thing, kind of the key points I'm thinking here is transitions. So when we are, making a transition from one place to another, or whenever we are doing something for a first time, it's very, highly intensive, critically intensive learning period, which basically means that in these cases, we need some form of support. Reflection doesn't happen per se, so we don't sit down and reflect. Reflection is an interaction. Interaction with ourselves, so asking ourselves questions, being provoked to ask ourselves questions, or asked by somebody else a question. But that form of interaction is actually quite important there as well. And also this process of kind of self-regulation and the process of reflection is some form of guidance and supervision is needed. And that guidance supervision is some form of coaching or mentoring so that you can actually kind of build on the experience and reflect on your experience and build forward. And I quite like the phrase by Alvin Toffler, which you probably, again, is one of my favorites, is that we really need to learn. So those who those who cannot learn and relearn will be the ones who are the illiterate of the 21st century. That basically means that we need to do systems which help us learn or relearn things. And that's what we need to be thinking when we're developing those kind of technologies. The third driver is, I think that's not a surprise. I mean, there's such a massive change in the technology, and we need to really pick up with that. Digitalization, and actually with the pandemic now, that's kind of like now is disrupted education. So all this, the digital transformation is now our highest priority, which basically means that we now have a lot of interaction and a lot of digital traces about the learning behavior, which we need to tap into. We also need to kind of look at the enabling technologies, which will allow us to do that. I mean, on the one hand, AI, so we're getting more machine learning, the knowledge graphs are becoming also deployable, natural language processing, again, so predominantly, I think the English language is quite well resourced, but also there's kind of coming with a number of different languages, and the chatbots are picking up as well. The multimodal interactions, I noticed that you have had seminar on extended reality, so it's not something I work on and I'm building here as an argument, but it is happening there, and we need to watch out for the technology. What I'm arguing as well is to think about the wearables and all the data and what the opportunities which we are doing with those. So what the technological changes are bringing is we really need to tap into data. And this is the question here, what data we need to collect. And with my experience, especially when I was in the medical school in Leeds and working on learning technologies, a question which, yeah, is interestingly, before you start to work with the practitioners, you don't realize, you don't even question yourself to think what data we don't collect about the students. And it was actually quite crucial in that case, the data which we were not collecting about the students, and how we can then, with the limited amount of data we have about the learning experiences, how we can augment that learning experience, to analyze that data in a meaningful way, and also the insights from the data to go back and improve the learning experience. And I think we are seeing more and more of the examples of learning, linking analytics together with the interactive systems and kind of twofold relationship. And yeah, I mentioned already that I'm the general chair of the AI in Education 2022. And this year we're actually doing it, co-locating it together with educational data mining, because there's pretty much like we are two sides of the same thing now. So the integration is the future. So what I tried to argue here is that we need a new breed of smart learning systems. What we need is to cope with this scale and diversity. We need to support self-regulation and learning from experience. And we really need to harness data, and also some of that data could be collective experience. It's kind of like collective intelligence here. And what I argue here is that this kind of new breed of system, I call them intelligent mentoring systems, and I'll kind of clarify later what I mean. Well, we start with, again, my inspiration from professional learning, start with thinking that we need to, well, basically everybody needs a mentor. You know, Forbes says that mentorship matters more than ever. So in the companies, now we're thinking about universities. So what do we mean in this case? I mean, there are so many definitions about the mentoring. There are so many debates about, we're talking about mentoring, are we talking about coaching, are we talking about guidance, are we talking about counseling? I don't want to get into that debate. I mean, the way I kind of see that is that you're interacting with somebody who is more experienced. So that could be a person, or could be a group, or could be, you know, like experience which is collected by other people. And through that experience, that, you know, is that interaction with this experience is helping you to develop self-awareness, to make sense of your experience, to reflect, to set goals and kind of set actions. When you look at the literature on mentoring, the kind of the key activities which are happening there is the questioning, the listening, clarifying, reframing, directing. This kind of interaction is happening there. And also there are different methods. So there are different models. This could be one-to-one mentoring or one-to-many, so kind of like a group mentoring. So you can do many to one. So again, this is the tapping into collective intelligence, or many to many, again, tapping into collective intelligence, not just for one person, but for many. So somebody, I mean, one of the questions here was about peer mentoring. I think that falls into those with the N there as well. So what I was thinking here is what will that be? I mean, how can we use intelligence, you know, AI methods to actually augment the mentoring process? So I'm not thinking of replacing the mentors. I mean, in some cases, we may be able to build digital mentors which interact with the learners. But in some cases, we can actually support the people who are the main cases. We can provide like pre-mentoring awareness. So I think the lesson we've learned about intelligent tutoring systems, thinking that, oh, we are going to build that tutor who is going to be like personalized and individualized to everyone, and not thinking initially about the the tutor in the loop, I think that lesson is learned by the community. And we're not going back to say, okay, now we are replacing mentors. No, but we're thinking about the functionality, which is augmenting the mentoring process, enabling it, making it more effective, and also in some cases, I think it, speeding it up, for example. So here is an example of mentoring, just to contextualize it. And this is a human mentoring. That's what's been kind of stimulating me. That's what's been, thinking about what can we do with the technology. Myself, I've been trained as a mentor, and what I've been trained to do, and what I've understood is that your goal here is to help the mentee to get from point A to point B. And a good mentor usually becomes redundant because the mentee has moved on with their life. And so kind of what I do in those sessions is, quick sessions, quick probing, and a lot of listening, trying to understand the kind of the contextual parameters when the person is discussing. For example, you talk to a PhD student thinking about, I don't know, like next funding, or thinking about, career direct dimensions. So you try to understand the key, through listening and through questioning, you try to understand the key parameters, and then you do prompts, you might do questions at that time. And then since you are sort of more experienced, either with the same situation, or you have, of other people who have gone through the same situation, you pull out and you share experiences. And then you kind of like leave that person to, you're not there to tell them that that's the recipe to do that. You're there to help them understand their own situation and to kind of give them some possible suggestions, but it's their choice and their decision. This is another one very interesting conversation I had. Okay, so can these steps be supported, automated, and scaled? So this is the kind of the way I think we can be doing those systems. First, we need some form of sensing of the context. So that may be something about the learner, but also maybe something about the kind of the situation in which they are in. What can we sense? We sense engagement, reflection, confidence, motivation, stress, attention. Based on what we sense, we can then think about, kind of go further interaction. So that's what I call it, interaction nudges. So we can question, prompt, clarify. And what I also call is navigation nudges, where we start to give them tips, suggestions, and examples. It's actually quite a shallow and I believe quite agile architecture as well. So at least the way we've done it, and I'll show you an example from now on. It actually allows us to do kind of inject a little bit of smartness and also to build up on the smartness. And as soon as, I think the crucial here is for us to realize that we are actually not thinking about deep learner modeling or deep, group modeling, etc. Because let's face it, we won't be able to do it anyway. So we are limited by the data we know, and we're limited by how much we can, analyze about and how much we can understand. So let's see what we can sense. And then based on that, we can then decide to interfere through some kind of a form of nudges. So there's lots of work. I mean, the work on nudges in Leeds have done for kind of many years. I just was thinking, okay, where should I start? The idea came from an EU project we had, which started 2009 and finished in 2013. I was thinking, what's kind of the future of those systems? And that's one of the systems we built with that was a system called active video watching. So the idea is that you watch kind of, in this case, simulations of the activity which you're trying to learn. In this particular case is for presentation skills, but the original idea was about medical, doctor-patient conversations. So training, medical training. And so you're watching the videos and kind of like, there's lots of training through, watching videos. The problem is it's very passive and you may or may not see the key points. So the idea is, can we make it active? Can we introduce some scaffolds? At that time, we're not calling them nudges. Can we introduce some scaffolds so that as the learner goes through and watches the video, that can help them see the main points? And we put here the interactive kind of the self-regulated learning scaffolds. So whenever you watch the video, you can stop the video. And it was kind of co-designed again with medical practitioners who were training, in that case, in their practice, and they were saying everything has to be very, very simple. So it's almost like YouTube. You stop, you click, and then you write a comment there of something you've seen. And kind of one of the ideas there is that you bring that comment to relate to your real world experience because you're watching a simulated activity. And we put sentence openers as kind of scaffold, the kind of reflective scaffolds here. So what does your comment relate to? And also depending on the activity, so we call these things here, what does it relate to as aspects? So you put a comment and you put an aspect, what it relates to. And you could see the history of your comments, and then there is a social space. So basically you watch individually and you annotate the videos, and there is a social space, and then you go there and you see what other people have done, and then you put another reflection scaffold on top of that, where you can see other people's comments and you can reflect on these comments, and you can say, well, this is useful for me, I hadn't thought about that, I didn't notice this, etc.
So there's been our halfway mark. Okay.
Thank you. We've been doing that quite a lot. We've done various different studies in collaboration with the University of Canterbury. Most of the work comes with Tania Mitrovic from there and her group. Recently Tania and I did a paper, the AI Ed journal. I think that's kind of summarizes what I'm talking today, but there's been lots of other different dimensions of this work. So, the first experimental study was, does it really support the learning? Kind of control study. We needed to look at presentation skills. We developed this kind of quick taxonomy of presentation skills so that we know what we're looking at, and we wanted to see whether they actually are noticing these things in the comments. So it was like, pre-test, experience with the first space in the individual space, and then it's kind of test after that, and then it's experience with the social space and test after that. Kind of usually takes about a month. It's like people are sent a reminder to do it, and then they can go and they can interact with the system, and then they're sending another reminder, so a particular space is open and they go to that one at the second space. So as I said, we've done many different studies, but kind of what we noticed there is that writing comments and rating comments does lead to increased conceptual knowledge. So people start to understand more things about the domain, see more things, aware of more aspects of giving good presentations. The micro scaffolds do have positive effects. So in other words, when they're starting to use the different aspects, that actually is helping, again, with the conceptual knowledge and also with the kind of usability of the system. And writing comments is actually, in generally reflection. So writing comments is note taking, but also we ask these comments to be the notes to be related to personal experience. It is actually demanding, and where to look, what to write, how to do it is actually, it does need support. We could have stopped at that point and thinking, how can I improve the system? But we were thinking, well, let's try to bring in nudges, and let's try to bring those nudges, again, kind of inspired by work in social sciences. Let's try to bring those nudges in an intelligent way, in a more, intelligence is probably not the right word, in a systematic way. So when you're bringing nudges within your system, you need to be thinking about the choice architecture. So the choice architecture is what is your target behavior, what is your problematic behavior, and then how to get from the problematic behavior to the target behavior. So where to start from? I mean, here is the point of like having a data-driven approach. Like once you start to have different studies with the system, which has limited or no intelligence whatsoever, you start to get insights of where things go wrong or where things need support. So in our case, we to design our nudges, we're looking at clustering users to identify what's the problematic and what's the target behavior. And then also we wanted to find out within the videos where exactly should they be looking at. So that's we found that the so-called high attention intervals. And also we looked at, again, using text analytics to identify comments which are of good value, so that then we can show those comments to the others so that they can be provoked to think about these aspects. So I will now skim through this. If you want more detail, I can come to that. So based on these three parameters, we can then come up with the choice architecture. So here is the observed behavior, which we want to correct. It's like problematic behavior. So the passive watching, so just watching, not stopping, not writing a comment, or not noticing important parts. So we have those high attention intervals where key things are being discussed, and then you're just glancing through them and you're not making any comment on that. Or you're writing a comment, but that comment is very shallow. So you're not using the, when we're looking at these aspects, for example, some aspects are deeply reflective, other aspects is like, I like this point. So we want you to go through, make a deeper reflection, and also not linking to your personal experiences. So this is like observed behavior. So what is our target behavior for that? I mean, we want you to make comments, not just to passively watch without actually stopping and noting points. You want not just to make comments, but notice important parts, make reflective comments, and refer to personal experience. So this is from the observed and target. Now we're thinking about the choice architecture. How can we move from the observed to the target? What do we need? What do we need to nudge here? The paper which I've put here as a reference is the inspiration paper for our nudge framework. So it's a taxonomy of choice architecture techniques and a taxonomy of the possible nudges. So decision information nudges, decision structure nudges, and decision assistance. So with decision information, we want to help to make the decision easier. So it's the decision to write the comments and make it easier, the decision to see key points as made easier. The decision structure, this is while you are doing the activity to make sure that it has appropriate structure. So what makes a good comment, for example. And assistance is provide reminders, and also facilitate commitment here. Here is just examples of how we shape those nudges. Again, in a very simple I would call it sometimes even quite a shallow way. So we use dialogue games model. With the dialogue games, so basically each nudge is seen as a dialogue game. So with the dialogue games, you actually have a goal. You need to have, when you're doing the goal, you need the target behavior, you need the what you've observed with the context, and you also need how you are going to interfere in this case. So here is an example of decision information, which is basically make information visible. So this is the signposting you've seen. That's a typical nudge. Decision structure, increase effort in using different aspects. So if a person is not using a diverse set of aspects, but is just focusing on noticing one particular point, we are asking them to go further, and also to facilitate commitment. So if you have started making good comments, keep on making, and then showing how beneficial that is for the others. We've discussed that in the paper. If you are interested, I'm happy to share the paper with you. So here is how it actually ended up in the system. So here is the prompt, so the personalized prompt as the user is going through the environment. So, and it's not watching the videos, not sharing any comments, the prompt is coming there. This is the passive, this is the signposting. So it's just really showing in the video the kind of the areas where we have key aspects which are worth noticing, and also you can see good comments to kind of like prompt your thinking. We did several studies with this improved system with the nudges. Again, not going to go into detail here, but we did studies with postgraduate students, studies with undergraduate students, and they compared with and without the nudges, what is happening. We're very lucky because Vania Dimitrova is actually running the system at the University of Canterbury, and they're doing lots of students with across different disciplines. We also run with postgraduate students here in Leeds, right? So what's interesting here is with all the studies, we have nudges result in more even use of various aspects, which is good. I mean, we ask them to think about different aspects, and they do. They result in more comments, which is again good, in not necessarily not in both cases. Foster active and constructive behavior, again, is mostly in the undergraduate students, and it's not statistically significant in postgraduate students. And results in a difference in the subjective opinions. Again, this is the subjective opinions about the system. Again, with the undergraduate, statistical significance. With the postgraduate, there wasn't statistically significant. So what we have seen here is, I think you probably are aware of this, I mean, judging from the questions I've been asked, that the learner sourcing is happening now. So we're really tapping into this learner sourcing. So behavior of past learners with the system. So comments from the others, things which other learners have seen. And then we're using that in order to design the nudges. So we are tapping into that data. The choice architecture is kind of a nice way of linking, well, I believe, a nice way of linking with data analytics. So the data analytics tell us what the problems are, and then we design the interaction in order to fix those problems. And then we observe them later on what's happening. And then the interaction means here we use personalized prompts, visualizations, which were not personalized, but they were kind of like, and also like indicators. They seem to do a good work. What we also noticed there is that not all simply writing comments is not enough. We need to look at the quality of these comments. And this is the strands of work we're looking at the moment. So we have 2 PhD students, one in Leeds, working with me, is looking at not just watching the whole video, but can we actually chop the videos? Can we cut and identify episodes in the videos which are particularly important for particular points, and then link those together so we can create a narrative for the learner. So that's a different way of suggesting and navigating the learner through the content. And then the one which Vania Dimitrova is supervising is Negar Mohammad Hassan, who is actually looking at the quality of the comments and how we can encourage learners to do more reflective comments, again, kind of improving the nudges. We're also looking at different domains. So we've done a lot of work on presentation skills. And in Leeds, we're looking at healthcare needs analysis conversations, simply because we are kind of involved in such a project, and these are difficult conversations. And also, Vania in Canterbury are looking at software engineering, project management, any kind of like soft skills around software engineering. I want to very quickly mention to you 2 other projects which are related again with the nudges. So this is a project with healthcare, Health Education England. So this is the health provider for the UK. And so this basically is kind of all the health workers. So this health education provider for the UK. So all health workers are kind of like going through their professional learning and with Health Education England. And they're particularly looking at resources and how to encourage people to go and upskill nowadays and think about other, their learning needs when they really are thinking. This project started pre-pandemic. It continues. We are still running on that. So we haven't given up on this, but you can imagine that during pandemic, obviously that there were highest priorities and professional learning and development was not. So we were looking here at how we phrase the nudges. And again, we use the same taxonomy of nudges, and then we shape the nudges. So here is an example of feedback. So we're giving you feedback why, how this resource is, where you are, and how is the resource is helping. External information, we're giving the resource. Opinion leader, in this case, is the organizations which have given the accreditation for this resource. What is the benefit for you, like earning points. And then this is the kind of the self-regulation you're picking it for future needs. We did that with medical students, and it's interesting, it was kind of like the opinion leader and the external info were the most important and the most kind of widely used nudges, widely preferred nudges. So we then did a study with healthcare workers, and at the moment we are analyzing to see the differences between, so there are differences in experience, but there's also difference in the organizational culture. And there is a difference, so they are not using the opinion leader there as the main one. I think they were looking more the external info, can't remember. So there's a subtle difference between both, but we are analyzing the results at the moment. And another thing which we did in healthcare education, I'm mentioning that this was the medical school. I'm mentioning that because it's kind of related to some of your work here as well. It's a massive system. My colleagues there in the school of, in the Leeds Institute of Medical Education were developing. And kind of the vision is very good. So we want this digital companion for personalized adaptive learning. So we're bringing all the data which we're collecting about the students, and can we use that then to help them become self-regulated learners. Particularly, I worked on the clinical skills feedback. So when the students go to hospitals, they use this mobile app where they're writing their own reflections, and also the healthcare a professional who is examining them is writing reflections, voice recording reflections there. The interesting here is the co-design. I'm mentioning this because a lot of work was done on co-designing this with the health professionals, co-designing this with learners, and we've got exciting lessons learned on that. So if there are any interests, I can elaborate that later or can refer to papers. You actually have the work. I cite your work here in eCoach, the eCoach system. I actually teach personalization, user adaptive systems, and we use eCoach as one of the examples. And I think you've got there already. And what is exciting for me here is that I don't know how you managed to do all these kind of exciting link to the information systems and the individual characteristics of the learners. But as you can see, that kind of recommendations and suggestions is this kind of mentor-like systems I'm suggesting, because they're not really tutors, they're not advisors, they're not guiders, so they're here to support you through this self-regulation process. And that's it, really. So I'm kind of finishing. I think that the times is right for us to start to think about this new architecture. We might actually go to be more shallow in some cases, but we really need to tap into the data and think about small intelligence, which can make a difference, and also kind of control and measure the things are changing. Just a big thank you for, of course, I'm not talking about things which I have done. So it's a big team behind in Leeds and outside of Leeds, healthcare company we're working with, and also the University of Canterbury, of course, active and Adelaide for active video watching. I'll stop here now. And there have been 3 questions. I'm happy to answer those, but I also, let's see what other questions you have.
Well, that was just wonderful. Thank you so much, Vania. I am just so inspired by this work. Looks like maybe we should just start with one of the questions that was posed beforehand. Okay. So you had drawn out, I think, perhaps the question about the most challenging hurdles might be a good one to start with.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got 3 questions in advance, and I actually prepared a slide for each of those 3 questions. And this was the one with the hurdles was the last one, but I thought, well, actually, that's the killer question. So I put responses to that one. So if you want, I can look at those questions. So this was the first question. Well, that question, the hurdle. What are the most challenging hurdles facing this technology, and how do you see them being surmounted in the near future? And I thought that's really a nailed it question. It's a challenging question. I think we're talking about very initial stages. I mean, the future, in a way, the future is here, but in a small scale. So we are seeing, kind of like system, some of those systems, and they will be growing. But I think at the moment, this is what I see as the answer. Again, that's now based, it's a very subjective answer because it's based on my personal experience. And that's particularly like my work in the medical school, for example, with the MyPal system, but it's not only that system. We really need to think about, I think the first hurdle is the expectations. So we start to, I think we learned that lesson with the intelligent tutoring system. So just like get the expectation right from the very beginning. And I think we need to be clear about in the expectations, the role of the technologies and the role of technology, the role of people who are not doing the technology, and people who are actually doing the actual, mentoring and support and the overall the organizations. What I learned also here is the limitations of the data and technology. We really need to be aware about this upfront. So for example, this situation I mentioned with the clinical skills passport with the medical school. And it turns out what people are recording in the app is a very small fraction of what actually happens. And if you are only recording and if you're only analyzing that textual data, what people have recorded there, and based on that, you're starting to make judgments and you're starting to nudge, I think the nudges would work, but then that's why we need to nudge and not more than that, because we have a very limited view of that. So how we can overcome this, I think we need to start to think about augmenting the mentoring process and basically see what's the process and where we can augment. And we really need to think about technology providing some new forms of mentoring. So not conventional, that's why I say mentoring, because in some cases may not be the conventional mentoring, it's just the technology is an enabler. The second thing is the scope of these new systems, because it's what do we call those new systems? We call them mentors, coach, guides, counselors, advisors, etc. So I think that's, we can get into those definitions and then not quite sure. I think I don't know whether intelligent mentoring or intelligent coaching, whatever we call it as a title, but I think we need to start to think about this new functionality. And what I would suggest here is consider a model that's most appropriate for the context. If you go to this intelligent mentoring systems workshop, the link which I used on kind of the previous slide, there were some where they're saying counselor, there's some where they're saying career coach, there's some which are saying, like in your case, you're calling that e-coach, but it's kind of like a self-regulated, we call it MyPal, or in the active video watching, we're kind of not even calling it anything. It's just the system is exhibiting some this kind of behavior. So all I would say is contextualize and don't really think about that much on what exactly is in the name. And then the partnership, I think the last thing is very important, because we really need to build this partnership with the educational researchers and with the practitioners who are actually doing this kind of like, the human, the human support, the human mentors, the human advisors, the human guides, and also the theories how to do it. We are missing that. I think we need to really build that partnership with those communities. I think that's what I can answer to this question.
Yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense as an answer. I'm particularly fascinated by the intentional selection of data collection you have to do, right? And how that then informs everything that you can understand from there and what you can nudge around, right? What are the pieces of data or the types of data that you've seen people choose not to collect in these moments?
Well, I mean, in my other work, I'm grappling with is any kind of diversity data is very hard to collect. So I don't know whether you're collecting in eCoach neurodiversity data, for example. Are you collecting, I don't know, like, social status data? Because there was another question was about the social cultural, and I've got an answer to that one as well. But my first question is, what do you mean by culture? So in this case, so I think this kind of data about individual differences are very difficult to collect. I mean, for example, in active video watching, we asked this self-regulated questionnaire to find out the self-regulation skills. So you did psychometric questionnaires in eCoach, well, at least the version which I've looked, I don't know whether you're still using that, but you get these and you get the data. But if you don't have that, where would the data come from? I mean, you cannot it's very difficult to approximate that data.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's the data which is very hard to collect. And because it's hard to collect, then you need to bear that in mind, that you're missing important piece of the equation. So when you're creating your nudges, you need to be more careful about, the how, the language, the way you're saying that. I mean, that's what we did with the medical domain. We just simply don't have that data. So in this case, we're not very assertive in this case. So we just tune down the language just to make sure that we're not doing any damage with these suggestions. So that's, absolutely, I think, the missing data. I mean, another kind of data, I'm not a big fan, well, probably not at this very moment, of this lifelong learner modeling, because I think people change, but again, kind of any data about the temporal dimensions is hard to collect, and it's also hard to analyze. So in my case, I'm thinking, why can't we just do it like a session-based? So at this very moment, that's why I'm talking about sensing. At this very moment, this is what I sense about that learner, and this is how I can support them, rather than looking through data which is very, very hard to collect, and also is not representative. But I know that it's not a kind of universally shared view, and I know that many people actually do like to look at this, deep temporal dimensions of the users, of the learners. And I don't want to be provocative, but I think that's a very subjective view, because I think it's so hard to get reliable temporal data. How somebody is progressing, through the years, through their career, to be able to interject. So I would rather do it like a short session based.
I love the call out. I think that's such a great point. And we really do need ways to better grapple with how little you know about them between moments, right? And you can only speak to what you do know in a single session. And yet, what is the opportunity to connect it, even if you that's fascinating. So perhaps that's a good moment to switch to the cultural question. What are the cross-cultural?
My second cultural. Yeah. Well, I have actually a question to you. So it's like a fantastic question. What are the cross-cultural challenges for such mentoring systems? I would say it's a very good question for a research project. Or for PhD project, even more than that. So it's a fantastic research question. It's not a research question which I have investigated, and there can be so many different dimensions to investigate this research question. But I think the first thing is, in the red, I've put things which I have kind of investigated, which are related to this. I think the first thing you need to decide is, what do you mean by culture? We've done a paper looking at culture by nationality, and they're kind of looking at the various dimensions which are covered in that, and trying to kind of capture it with an ontological model. But culture is kind of what? Learned behavior within a group. Learned norms, or learned rules. And then you start with, where do you draw the culture? And then if you want to investigate, culture is very messy. So you need to identify what aspects of culture you are looking at, and control that. So that's where the messiness comes from. And then how can we sense the culture? Imagine that we're looking at, in terms of I don't know, like organizational culture or, I mean, power dynamics, for example. How do you sense that? What information are you getting from this? And what parameters do we need to consider in these cases? Again, these are questions. I don't have the answers. I'm just saying that you really need to think if you are, I mean, it's a good research project. And then when we're talking about the nudges, which people see at the very end, so the actual nudge, they say, oh, does this nudge have social cultural awareness? I think what we need to think about here is that whenever we're doing these nudges, we're thinking about when we need to stop, what we need to say, and how to say it. And I think particularly the culture here, considering, I don't know, could be the group culture, considering, I don't know, maybe ethnicity, maybe nationality, whatever you're saying, like anything learned behavior from different group settings. I think particularly is the last size of how to do it. And I think the way I see it, particularly with our project in healthcare learning, is, and where we are comparing like students versus health professionals, so this is kind of two different cultures, is really experimentation to find out either you build the system and you're observing what is happening, or, so like in AVWs, we have compared undergraduate versus postgraduate, for example, and we noticed the differences, or you mock, like we did in healthcare, and you observe what is happening to see those parameters. But it's I think it's such a big challenge. If anybody is doing research in this case, scale down, because in order to do it properly, you really need to scale down to something which is details. Yeah.
Well, that feels like the perfect note to leave this on. Thank you so much for your time today, Vania. This has just been absolutely wonderful. And I'm so excited to continue to follow your research, and maybe we can even think about an experiment to run. I'm just such fantastic work. Thank you for taking the time to share with us today.
Thank you.
Stopping the recording.